Right, welcome to the Hovercraft Club of Great Britain Guide to Racing. So this is a beginner's guide to hovercraft racing. When we talk about hovercraft racing, we're not talking about those, and we're not talking about those. We are talking about these.
Gets away. So those first four, watch out for them, they're going to be back into the lead in this race.
They're getting down.
Dan Turnbull, 21, Dan Turnbull.
Okay, so what you've been watching there was the finale of the Formula One hovercraft season. One of the many formulas that the Hovercraft Club of Great Britain run during their national season. You could see there that the racing was from a mass start, recovering terrain of land and water and various different cambers and humps and bumps. Speeds reached up to 80 miles an hour with 0 to 60 in approximately 4 seconds. The craft are generally the size of a small car, weighing anywhere between 80 and 180 kilos. And can be bought from anywhere between just over £1,000 to paying up to £25,000. The Hovercraft Club of Great Britain, or the HCGB, runs national race series, usually 6 to 8 race meetings a year around the country. In addition to that, we've also got international race events and the World Championships, which is commonly held every 2 or 3 years. As a new starter, you'd be expecting to start in novices if you were over 16. If you are under 16 and aged between 11 and 15, you would expect to start in the colt class. Both of those are for new drivers, and there are specific formulas for those new drivers. You'd expect to cover 15 novice or colt races before you then qualify up into the national formulas, so you will be segregated from the normal races. You can see on the right hand side there, typical colt craft and a typical novice craft. Both of those are powered by a single engine, driving a single fan. Nice and simple, relatively cheap, and really easy to get into. Racing fees for a typical 2-day race meeting based on the 2020 prices. For a single adult racer for the weekend, you'd be expected to pay £124. A family of 2 adults and 2 children with 1 adult racer will be £148. And with 1 adult racer and 1 colt, you'd be looking at £164. And you can share craft and reduce the cost across the family if you so desire. You would need to do a few bits of paperwork before you actually arrive on the site. So becoming a member of the Hovercraft Club of Great Britain would cost you £38.50 for a full family membership, and you would also need to apply for a novice or a colt licence depending. Novice licence would be £25, colt licence is £20 at current prices. While you're applying for your novice licence, you could arrange for a craft number. You obviously need to arrange for a craft. You could obviously buy one, you could buy it new, or you could buy a used one, or you could borrow a craft, and there are 2 loan craft available from within the club. Obviously, seek advice from branches or local club members to get an idea of what you might be interested in before you commit yourself to buying anything new. And then once you've achieved all of those things, you can enter the race meeting by paying online. And the online race entry fee includes third-party insurance. And you also need to pay some site fees as well. We've just covered the overall cost on the previous slide. You can pay online or you can pay them on site. If you wanted to pay online, we would recommend that you do so. You can use the club shop. We've got a view of the club shop there. Again, accessible through the internet. You can pay your race entry fees, craft registration and licenses, and site fees through that club shop. We recommend a bit of pre-race preparation before you commit yourself to the race event itself. That would include reading the event safety information, the competition regulations, and ensuring your craft meets the construction regulations for racing. You'd also be recommended to complete the scrutineering form before you attended the race meeting. on the morning of attending the race meeting. Most of those documents will be sent to you when you apply for your license. If possible, we'd recommend that you practice driving the craft as well. There are some specialists, event specialists, that can help with access to a suitable site, or contact your local branch and see if they have a site available that could be suitable. If possible, also get your initial scrutineering done ahead of time, just to make sure that your craft does meet the regulations. If it's a new craft, you will have to apply for logbook as well. It's a little bit easier if you can get that initial scrutiny done in advance of attending the first race meeting. There's a lot of things to do at the beginning of that first day. Once you've done that, you expect to be subject to a driver test. Again, you can do this driver test in advance. It can be done up to 2 months before the first race. It tests you for your basic low, slow and medium speed maneuverability, and we'll cover things such as parking in a garage and setting off again, navigating between cones, and some questions on flags and basic craft knowledge, usually on how to stop and start the engine. So we're just going to have a quick demonstration of a typical craft maneuverability test. So we're weaving between the cones. And you can see from the terrain that this is being done on that virtually any other vehicle would not be able to achieve this. This is ideal hovercraft territory, where the very high water table at the moment, and you can see lots of standing water, there's mud and very soft surfaces, yet the hovercraft is able to operate perfectly and manoeuvre perfectly on this very difficult terrain. So the driver there is just demonstrating that they've got control using the throttle, using the rudders, using their body weight. You can see them leaning as they're trying to get the craft to go in the direction that they want. And having completed that, we stop the craft, and then we move on to the next test. And this is parking in the garage. You can just see the 4 cones that highlight the 4 corners of the theoretical garage. We're bringing the craft in through the narrow entrance. It's only just wider and only just longer than the craft itself, and this is just to test that you can control it at very low speeds. Again, body weight, throttle and steering are all tested here. And having parked the craft, we've achieved that successfully. The next major test will be setting off again without knocking any of those cones over. Okay, just got some illustration here of some typical race gear. We would recommend that you don't use motorcycle leathers or motorcycle boots. They're not necessarily suitable for the conditions that we operate in. Normally, a waterproof suit, a helmet, either full face or with a visor, or open face with goggles would be recommended. Body armour is also recommended, but not mandatory. Overalls, just in case the weather's quite nice, or motocross jerseys tend to be quite popular nowadays. Gloves, knee pads, buoyancy aid and earplugs are all recommended. Okay. Normally you'd attend a race meeting with your own craft with some basic tools to maintain that craft as well, although tools and spares are available on site. So if you make friends with those around you once you've arrived on site, you usually find that you can tap into their knowledge and their stock of spares if need be. And you can see here we've got some basic tools, top left hand corner, cable ties for reattaching bits of craft and skirt segments, a battery drill, spare skirts, socket set, a plug spanner and some spare spark plugs, and then fuel and oil if we're running a 2-stroke. Most of the operation is with a 2-stroke. You would also expect to bring a funnel along so you can get the fuel out of the jerry can into the craft safely. A typical race site, as we just discussed, covers a race course, includes land and water. Usually has a paddock. There is restrictions on who is allowed in the paddock during operational periods, so you need to be above 6 years old. But there are paddock open periods where anybody can enter the paddock during non-operational periods. Also on site will be a campsite, toilets, a water point, usually an Elson point as well. Refreshments are often available on site as well. There will usually be a supplier for specific hovercraft spares, and the site will normally be open on a Friday in readiness for the weekend, either Saturday, Sunday, or on Monday if you're including the bank holiday weekend. We recommend that if possible you arrive on the site on the Friday because there's a lot of things to get done on the Saturday morning. Okay, so as we said, you're able to arrive and set up from Friday. Quite often people bring gazebos or event shelters with them, but they're not compulsory. Inside the paddock, you're expected to operate the craft at walking pace and no faster. There will be an engines off time that will be announced as the driver's briefing, and you're only expected to run engines up to full power in the dedicated engine test area. It's also known as the thrust test area. And of course, it's a very friendly sport. Neighbours and your fellow competitors will help you with any technical issues, repairs or tools. Here we have a typical race site as viewed from the air, and in the far corner, far left hand side, you can see the campsite. Next to the campsite we have the paddock where all the craft are stored along with all their trailers. Okay, we have a public viewing area below the image and the finish line and the race course on the right hand side. Also shown is the start grid labelled there, and race control, and it will be race control once you've had your craft scrutineered and you're ready to enter the event. It will be race control that you report to in the morning, on the Saturday morning, to get your wristbands and your insurance sticker. And you can also see here the driver's briefing is taking place on the grid, and that's where all of the drivers come together to be briefed on the detail of the race course and the various other facilities on the site, the number of laps that you'll have to be doing, and any other specific information that you need to know. And during that driver's briefing, you'll be expected to sign on. We'll cover that in a little bit. Okay, entering the race course from the paddock would normally be via a dedicated pit lane onto the start grid, and you move from the start grid down onto the race course, and then continue around that race course across the finish line, and you continue for as many laps as is comfortable. And then once you've finished your session, whether it be practice or whether it be a specific race, you cross the finish line. You may do a wind down lap as instructed at the driver's briefing, or you could come back into the paddock, raising your arm, crossing the course, and entering the paddock slowly and at walking pace to return back to your pit area. We have a predefined race schedule. You can see the number of different formulas that will be racing on any given day. There's a slight variation on the race format for the first race meeting of every season, because there'll be a lot of craft that need scrutineering and a lot of drivers that will need testing. But normally a race format for a 2-day event would be 2 sets of races per day, preceded by a practice session or multiple practice sessions for any given formula. And then repeat on the Sundays, slightly different times, because we've got a lot of the scrutineering and the extracurricular activities out of the way. We start the weekend, or you'd expect to start the weekend with scrutineering, then followed by the driver's briefing, and then we go into the practice sessions. That will be then followed by a paddock open, the first set of races, another paddock open if time allows, and then the second set of races. First morning will be quite busy. There's a lot of craft that will need scrutineering, including your own if you haven't had it done on the Friday. There will be the driver's briefing to attend, where you'll be introduced to the course, and you will need to sign on against your allocated race number and tick the appropriate boxes. So that's where you would normally sign on, and those are the boxes that you would tick for the novice class to show that you wanted to enter those particular races. Having been scrutineered, you'd register with race control, you collect your insurance sticker and the wristbands for everybody who's going to be on site, and allocate them across your team. If you haven't done so already, you'd be expected to do the maneuverability and the driver test to demonstrate your basic control of the craft, the knowledge of the flags and the craft basics. And then you'll be allocated a tester or a mentor who will be expected to help you throughout the weekend. A little bit more detail on scrutineering. That starts at 8:30 on the Saturday morning, and the craft will be inspected in situ. You will not be expected to have to move the craft to a specific scrutineering area. The scrutineers will come to you. Call the scrutineer over when you're ready, present your logbook and the scrutineering form you can see on the right hand side there. And you also present your race kit, including the helmet and the buoyancy aid, and they'll be inspected to ensure they meet the appropriate specifications. Once the craft has been scrutineered, if it's a brand new craft, you might be expected to do a flotation test, and those are usually done after driver's briefing. I would recommend for scrutineering that you try and get that done as soon as possible, because it starts at 8:30. If you can be up and about for that, ready with the craft ready for scrutineering, you can get that done very quickly, and then we can move on to doing the driver test. So having signed on, had your craft scrutineered, and you've been to race control and got your wristbands and your insurance sticker, you'd attach your insurance sticker to the front of the craft, and then you're ready for practice. As we've seen from the schedule, the colt and the novice practices are towards the end of the schedules, and that gives you an opportunity to watch the other racers. So you see how they enter the race course from the pit lane, and it gives you a good visual indication of where the race course goes and maybe some of the hazards as well. So take the opportunity to watch those other racers and learn from what they're up to as well. Make sure that you're prepared. Make sure your craft is fueled. Get your race gear on before your practice session is called. Warm the engine up and make sure your pockets are empty of any valuables. You will be travelling over water, and there is always the possibility that you might get significantly wet, so do not have anything in your pockets that you do not wish to get wet. You will, once the race course has been open for practice for novices or for your colt class, make your way to the end of the pit lane, and there you will be expected to stop the craft, stop the engine using the lanyard, and make sure that the lanyard works. They will inspect it, make sure that you have your insurance sticker attached to your craft, and then restart the engine and join the race course. Do as many laps in practice as you feel comfortable with doing. You're out there to gain experience, so try and do as many laps as you can. And then once you've finished, come back in. If your mentor or your tester is available, discuss any issues with those, and then you make sure that you're ready for your first race. So check for damage, loose skirts, make sure you're refueled so that the craft is ready to go, and then you can spend the rest of the morning seeing how everybody else gets on. Okay, so we're going to join a novice practice now. You can see we're joining the pit lane. The craft has been stopped on the lanyard and we're just restarting the craft. You see on the left hand side the practice board is up for the novice class. Lanyard is on and the marshals have checked that the insurance sticker is on there and the lanyard is attached to the driver. We swing round through the pit lane and enter the start grid. So as we're going down the start grid, we'll see some marshals in the distance. They'll make sure that the course is clear and that it's suitable to enter. Nobody's stopping us, so we continue down. Just quick check, make sure there's nobody coming, and then we're on to the race course. And we go across the finish line. So we start in the start grid, going across the finish line, and we're approaching the first hazard. And the first hazard is the right-hand bend, the hairpin. And in this particular case, as a driver, we've forgotten how to operate the throttle. Accidentally closed the throttle as we've gone into the corner, and the craft has come to a stop, which is what practice is all about. We're learning how to drive the craft and we're learning where the course goes. So we're zipping along the water quite nicely now, onto the land. Nice, simple, smooth transitions, so we can continue on nicely, picking up a bit of speed as we go up the hill, trying to avoid the worst of the bumps. The driver in this particular case is a re-qualifying driver, so he knows a little bit about how to drive the craft, but I think this is the first time we've driven this particular craft, and it's certainly the first time in a number of years he's driven this particular course. But he has been watching the other drivers, so he knows roughly what lines to take and roughly how to approach each corner. And as we've just seen with the throttle, there's been a few little teething issues, which is the whole purpose of practice. Coming down the hill now towards the finish line, we can see race control on the left-hand side. We're looking where we're going rather than looking particularly at the hazards and concentrating on trying to get this corner correct. So, starting our second lap now in practice. We can see the marshal points in the distance. No hazards immediately in front of us, so we zip onto the water again. Cross the water quite happily, and we're starting to get the hang of exactly where to put this particular craft on this particular race course. and we do a number of laps until we're either dizzy or we're happy that we know where we're going, and then arm up to indicate to any other users on the racecourse that we're slowing down, doing something unusual, and we're coming back into the pits. And in this particular racecourse, we do that through a dedicated pit lane, which you can see is nicely mowed, and then through probably the most difficult hazard of the whole thing, which is through the gate posts, which are only just wider than the craft. And this is one of the reasons why we do such a diligent test to make sure you can manoeuvre the craft at low speed through tight locations. And then we cope in with the camber. There's a bit of a slope on the field here as we go back into the paddock. So we're traversing across the field with the craft pointed up the hill a little bit. We're using the body weight over to the left-hand side to address any tendency to slip down the hill. And then we come into the pits nice and slowly. It's a two-way pit lane, so we have to be very aware of craft coming in the opposite direction, joining the new practice. Also be aware of crosswinds from craft that are running their engines up, and they will blow you from one side to the other as you go down the pit lane. So we're walking speed down towards the area of the paddock that we've chosen to park in for the weekend, and that's the end of a successful practice session. Stop the engine on the lanyard. Okay, typical first session issues, usually related to craft directional control. So you need to remember three things generally: use of the throttle, the steering, and use of your body weight. Okay, throttle is to make the engine operate, generate more power. So the more power you've got, generally the more thrust you've got, and the better it drives in the direction you want to go. Use the steering to operate the rudders. That points the craft in the direction that you might want it to go in, but you need to use that in combination with the throttle to actually get it to go in the direction you want to travel in. And you use your body weight to address any drift, compensate for any camber, and you can use that to also change the attitude of the craft. Sitting back raises the nose of the craft, leaning forward drops the nose of the craft, as well as going from side to side. Other factors that might be at play are the camber or slopes and transitions that you find on the racecourse. Again, you need to use body weight and throttle to control the craft to cope with cambers and transitions. And I'd recommend, as you drop onto, say you're dropping from land to water, you want as much throttle on as you can get away with, so that you've got a nice firm cushion to land on. And as soon as you're settled, you can roll the throttle off a little bit. Likewise, transferring from water to land, you're likely to be going uphill. You want to be sitting back a little bit, drive it up the hill with drive it up the slope with the throttle, and then once you get going, you can ease off the throttle and control it using the steering and the body weight in a small amount of throttle. Other factors at play will be wind direction and the strength, and obviously we've just seen that practice sessions relatively quiet. We've not come across any other craft on the course, but usually there will be other craft on the same course, and you'll need to cope with the thrust from those other craft in the presence of those craft. You may also have some technical issues, and it is not uncommon to have contact with other obstacles or with the craft, especially during your first few sessions of driving the craft. Should you experience any technical issues or driving issues on the racecourse, we do have a recovery team that will recover you back to the paddock as soon as it is safe to do so, and they can recover you from land or the water side of the course. And you can see here a craft that has suffered substantial damage as a result of contact with a immovable object. That's not untypical of a sort of damage that can be sustained on a hovercraft during racing. Okay, so we're now ready for our first race. We've been out and done practice. We know where the racecourse goes. We've got a rough idea of the conditions, and we've watched some of the other races on the racecourse to get an idea of what the major hazards might be. Craft is now fully fueled. We've got our race gear on prior to the races being called, and we've got the engine nice and warm. At the point where the 10-minute board goes up, we're ready to enter the pit lane and join the grid, and the pit lane will be open until the 2-minute board goes up onto the grid. If you're not able to join the grid before the 2-minute board, you'll be held in the pit lane, and you can enter the racecourse once the race has started and the grid is clear. If you're able to join the grid, then you follow your marshal's direction to your allotted grid position. If you're on novices, that on the first race, that will be on a first come first served basis, and subsequent races will be on your finishing order for the weekend. If you're as a colt, if you're joining as a new colt, you're likely to be placed at the back of the grid. Your lanyard will be checked to make sure that it does indeed turn the engine off once you've arrived at your appropriate grid position. And then once the race has started, do as many laps as you're comfortable with doing. You're there to learn to drive before you learn to race, but the more laps you do, the more experienced you'll become. And then once the race is complete, you return back to the paddock, discuss any issues that you've got with your mentor, tester, or other racers, and then you're ready to prepare for your second race. And we're going to join our driver for the day at the start of the first race. We find ourselves on pole position, having been the first racer out of the grid, out onto the grid. So we're parked up, the engine has been stopped on the lanyard, and we're now just getting ready. So we should make sure we've got all the race gear on just before we start the engine. Start it using the pull start, warm the engine up, make sure everything's okay. 2-minute board is going to be shown to us by the marshals on the grid. And that's normally the point at which you'd start getting everything ready, make sure the engine's started. Between the 2-minute board and the 1-minute board, you'd be just sort of looking around, making sure everything's okay, making sure there's nothing loose on the craft, get an idea of who's around you, to the left and to the right, so you know roughly what to expect. We're on the front row of the grid, so we're worried about the people immediately to our left-hand side and to the rear. We don't have anybody in front of us to worry about. 1-minute board's gone up now. Marshal is indicating that you should be showing them the fact that your lanyard is attached to your pursing, and then we move on to the light sequence. This is cut down, so we switch straight to the lights coming on. As the lights go off, that's the start of the race, and we're away. So down to the first corner. We've got the whole shot, so we find ourselves in front for the moment. Okay, we go around the corner using our body weight and the throttle. Run a little bit wide on the exit, but that's okay. That's allowed one person through into the lead, onto the water, and then up the hill. Okay, you see the differences in the racing lines taken by the guy who's leading. He's gone in fairly tight into that top corner, whereas we're taking a nice, smoother, wider line. That's generally the more efficient way of doing things. It also means that as you're turning in, you're not turning in quite so sharply and potentially upsetting the balance of the craft. Now heading down the hill, still in second place, but remember we're actually out here to get experience in driving, not necessarily racing. As we're going along, we can see the finish line, so that's the start of our second lap. We're coming up to the telegraph turn, turning again, starting to get the hang of this turn now, but we've got a re-qualifying driver on our right hand side who's made a better line of that through there. We can also see on the left hand side that we've got a waved yellow flag. That means there's a hazard on the course, and you can see the craft stricken on the right hand side on the water. We avoided managing to come into contact with that craft by sticking to the racing line. It's very easy under those circumstances to be staring at that particular hazard. You roll the throttle off, and if you do that, you'll end up heading towards the hazard rather than avoiding it. So it's always a good idea to make sure you're focused on where you want to be rather than where the hazards might be on the race course. We're aiming to go round the corners rather than hitting the markers on the corners as well. We've just been overtaken by somebody else, so we're now back into fourth place. Again, that was another re-qualifying driver that we found in front of us. We can also hear a funny noise to our right hand side, which possibly indicates that there's another craft present or very close to us. So in this particular case, we're taking a wide line on the way in, leaving room for somebody else to come up the inside. We're trying to avoid contact with anybody's benefit. They've run a bit wider, having rushed in on a tighter line, but because they've got more power, that's a twin engine Formula 2 craft that's just gone past us, they can get a little bit more go on the way out of the corner. And you can see here the effect on the camera of the spray being thrown up by the craft in front. So it's thrown moisture at us, it's also thrown a bit of air at us as well. Notice that we're taking pretty much the same line every time up the hill. And through the corners, we've obviously done a fair bit of practice, got our eye in, we know roughly what the conditions are like. And we're starting to get used to driving the race course now, so trying to be consistent, nice and smooth, dealing with the slopes and the cambers by using our body weight and steering uphill slightly where needed, and then we're turning in around the final corner across the finish line again to start yet another lap. But we see in the distance that we're starting to come up to a craft that's in front of us, which will be hopefully becoming able to lap shortly. Down onto the water again, nice and smooth, take our usual racing line. And then we're trying to judge the closing speed with the craft in front, and also being aware of any other craft that are behind us as well. In fact, just as we're approaching this craft to lap, you can see that we're taking our usual line. They're drifted a little bit wide at the top of the hill. That's allowed us to just nip up the inside through the gap and continue down the hill without any issues. We then move to a bit of footage later on in the race. Been quite an eventful race so far. We've lost a few places, we've done a bit of lapping, generally been quite good. Wind's not too bad, conditions are absolutely perfect. It's ideal to learn to drive in. You can see here we've just been lapped ourselves. He's taken a very tight line coming up the hill, and as a result actually been upset the balance of the craft, and we've actually unlapped ourselves again as a result of that. However, he's in a much quicker craft than we are, so we should be aware that he's likely to come back past us again. Yeah, looks like he's on our right hand side, there he is, but again he's taking quite a tight line into this last corner. That could cause him a few problems. We stick to our line, don't stare at him just in case you end up running into him, and again we've unlapped ourselves. Much better line around the last turn, nice and tight on the way out. I think we've probably just started our last lap. And off the water onto the land, again looking out for the leader, who's likely to take a similar line up the hill to the previous, where he's going to be on the right hand side. Again, quite a tight line on the way in, but this time he's managed not to upset the craft too much. A bit smoother this time and stayed in front, so we're just a lap down on the leader, not done too bad compared. And we come down the hill to finish the race. Across the finish line, take the checkered flag, and then a wind down lap, and then we return back to the paddock. Again, it's very easy under these circumstances. We've just done possibly 7 or 8 laps there at racing speed. You do need to sort of recalibrate the brain slightly as you come back into the paddock, make sure everything is wound down a little bit, much slower. First of all, we don't want to do any damage to the craft by banging on any posts that we're going through there, but also we want to be going nice and slowly into the paddock. We've got a nice big cooling off period here. It's not technically quite a difficult pit entry. We're almost pointing completely up the hill there to try and scrub a bit of speed off. You see on the left hand side as we start to enter the paddock that there's a craft in the thrust test area. Just make sure that we don't get caught by any thrust from that craft. It's pointing in the direction, so we're okay. And then nice and slowly back into the paddock. Again, just be aware of the craft that have also just finished, that are possibly still running. You might get a bit of a crosswind. try to make sure that there's no significant momentum as we travelling down the paddock. Just take it nice and slowly. Park in your pit box, and to be welcomed by fellow competitors in the pit crew. Excellent, and that's the end of your first race. Complete success. As I said, there's 2 craft available from within the club, which are available on a loan basis. Those that are suitable for colts, juniors, Formula 3, Formula 2 or Formula 50. So if you decided that you wanted to enter any of those particular classes, you could enter as a novice or as a colt using those particular craft. As I said, colts are aged 11 to 13 or are new juniors who are younger than 16 years of age. They are restricted to 55 kilos of thrust, which generally means that craft suitability is sort of 25 to 30 horsepower, but you can restrict a more powerful craft by putting some skirt material over the guard to drop the thrust down to the appropriate level, so you could use a 40 to 50 horsepower class craft. Novices are 16 or over. You can enter novices with a Formula 3 craft, a Formula 50 or a Formula 2 craft, a Formula 35 craft, or a Formula 1 craft restricted to 150 kilos of thrust. And again, you could do that by putting skirt material over the guard. So, in truth, you could enter virtually any craft that's eligible for national racing in the novice class. And you can see on the right-hand side there a selection of craft that would be suitable for either for colts, for juniors, or for novices. Some general hints and tips that have been provided by recent novices, which is to do as much preparation as possible before the first meeting. Try and get this a very busy Saturday morning, so try and make it as easy as possible for yourself by getting some driver tuition if possible. Get a scrutineer to look over the craft and get the initial scrutiny done if possible. Make sure you've got your paperwork sorted out and pay online. Makes life a lot easier when you come to a Saturday morning. When it comes to driving, avoid a target fixation. Generally, if you're staring at a hazard, you are likely to hit it. It will affect the way that your body sits in the craft, where you place your body weight, the direction which you turn your rudders. Where possible, try to avoid staring at any hazards. Concentrate on where you want to be going rather than where the hazard is parked. I've mentioned before that we recommend you remove car keys, phone, wallet or any other items that you don't want to get wet. It is a water sport or semi-water sport. You ought to be prepared to get wet. Obviously, wear a lanyard. You'll need to have that lanyard on you when you're driving that craft. We recommend you either attach it to your buoyancy aid or put it onto your non-throttle hand, onto your throttle hand, so that you can raise your other arm to highlight whether you're slowing down in front of other people. We recommend that you use earplugs, and a bit of feedback from other drivers has definitely been to wear knee pads. The first couple of races can be pretty hard on the knees. The other thing we'd recommend that you do is set the fan blade pitch to match the engine RPM. In the bottom corner here you can see myself and Father setting up a craft. So we're tweaking the blade angle to try and optimize the engine RPM. You want to try and match the fan to the engine power output, and if you can do that, you'll end up with a craft that is really rather good to drive. If you get that wrong and you've got too fine a pitch on, you won't be producing much thrust, but there will be lots of engine revs. If you've got too much pitch on, it won't necessarily go around corners very easily. And we did hear from the engine note during some of the racing sessions there that the engine was dying off quite a lot on the left-hand bends and it was picking up on the right-hand bends. That would indicate that there's maybe just a little bit more pitch on that fan than was ideal, and you could probably liberate a little bit more performance from that craft by knocking a bit of pitch off, which is relatively easy to do. If you need any help with that, contact your local branch members in advance, or on the race site, just call a few people over to give you a hand. So they're things that have been highlighted by sort of new novices, new juniors, and from experienced racers as well. It's all useful hints and tips. Okay, so what to do next? We've had our first successful day. Well, it's a very friendly club, so make friends, watch the racing, and enjoy yourself. Help the branch pack the course away at the end of the weekend if you can afford the time. And as a novice, you will be expected to do some marshalling prior to qualifying up into the national races as well. And it's a really good way of getting to learn some of the issues around the race course as well. It gets you closer to the racing, and you can learn from other people's mistakes a little bit easier from a marshalling position. So we'd recommend you get involved in that as well. And then relax and enjoy the fun. We'll finish there with some useful links. So for general information, email info@hovercraft.org.uk. For any membership enquiries, we've got member services at hovercraft.org.uk. Licenses and race number enquiries at licenses@hovercraft.org.uk. And then the link to the HCGB online shop for membership, race entry and license payments is shown there. And there was also 2 Facebook pages as well. There's the standard Hovercraft Club of Great Britain HCGB Facebook page, and then there's a members only Facebook page which you can access once you've joined the club. There's a lot more information available through those contacts. Okay, thank you for listening. I think we'll leave it there.